What a humble-based person does, if they see something that's out of balance in another person, first thing a humble-based leader will do is they'll look, where am I doing it?
Hello and welcome to Uncovered, the podcast with your host, Jason Irving. Join me in a journey to understand what's truly happening in your world and the world around you. This is not about how you're living life on the surface. It's about what's truly driving you from under the covers. I'm going to take you on a journey to deeply uncover the reason why you are here, the ultimate purpose in your problems and the way that they have shaped your life up until now. See, I believe you have a purpose and your problems are the highway towards ultimate realization of that journey towards freedom and the reconnection of your true self. I've been told I have a different spin on most things, and I'll be giving you my understanding of life, love, and what we're all here for, purpose. To get the best out of this podcast, drop what you already know so you can discover what's beyond you. So join me, let's play this game of life and bring on liberation, transformation and change. Let's do this.
Hi Jason, how are you today?
Not too bad, how are you?
I'm good too, thank you.
So we're going to be doing humility. It's the thing that goes missing in leadership a lot of the time, and I was actually on a Facebook post with a person who had a lot of humility, and then it all got taken away the moment he became successful.
So what usually happens then?
There's a really good movie. I love it. It's one of my favourite movies. Lots of music and song and stuff. It's called The Greatest Showman, and it really clearly explains what happens when people lose their perception of who they are when they've become successful, and they're driven by success and leadership without actually thinking about the people and the reason why they started in the first place. So he almost lost his family and everything from his driven goal to actually make everything, have that big beautiful house and make sure everyone saw him as this person. Mm-hmm. Right? And I think this is where people lose their perception in leadership, and it even happened when I was a therapist. People would come who were 20 years experience as a therapist, and they'd have their head up their ass thinking that they had it all covered. And I think humility gets lost through experience if you're not mindful as a leader. So in my opinion, a learning-based leader is the essential based leader. So a learning-based leader is someone who's continually learning while they're on the job leading. Mm-hmm. They're never thinking that they're, in their opinion, they're never thinking that they're the expert. Mm-hmm. So I've had so many people put me into the expert position, I don't put myself there as a leader. So it's very, very different when you've got humility. There's two forms. Like, this is what I'm trying to break in our academy, is that a lot of people in the academy have crushing based humility. And so what that means is they're way too humble to the point that they don't actually accept any recognition for the things that they are able to do so naturally well.
And is that related to low self-confidence as well? Yeah,
well, it's not necessarily. There's two things here that drive this. There's self-esteem and confidence, and they're very different. So Anya spoke about this. My wife, she was talking about me in a call for the academy members, and she said Jason's got a lot of confidence because he shows up, right? So it doesn't mean that I have the self-esteem though. So lacking in self-esteem is the humility crusher, and the confidence means you can show up and do things and achieve and all of those sorts of things, and they're very, very different. Okay, so we've got to learn to be able to have that self-esteem rise enough to a point where you're feeling confident and not arrogant. And so, in my opinion, arrogance is the cornerstone for people who are terrified they're going to lose something. So they have arrogance in their bucket, especially people who have become very successful leaders. They actually turn their ears off to feedback.
Oh yeah, definitely. I've seen that.
Have you experienced that?
Yeah.
Have you experienced that from me?
No. Not from you, but from
thank
other
God.
people. No, you always, that's the thing, you always listen to feedback and, you respond to it, and then you evaluate for yourself, what you can improve, and do that straight away. So, and that's what you, I think, mean as well with the learning based.
Yeah, well, thanks for the feedback.
Oh, that's all right.
So that's what really crushes a leader, in my opinion. If you lose your humility, your ears are gone, and your growth disappears. So I remember I've watched quite a few people who've asked a question that was maybe a little bit too left field or too difficult, or sitting in the person's wheelhouse to crush the ask, right? And if the person's crushing an ask of a question, why would you do that? Why would you try and humiliate someone who's just asked a question?
Yeah, because you feel like they're personally attacking you, but they just want to check their understanding of what you said.
That's right. And there have been times where people feel like I've done that in the academy, where I was just called them out and said, hey, this is what I see. And they feel humiliated. I love questions. I think they're the most important thing. And if things are not in your wheelhouse, then you're not, as a leader, leaders are quite often, I've spoken to a lot of leaders, especially this year and last year, they're not allowed to not have an answer. They're not allowed to not be the expert at things. And I think this is really, really hard, because it puts a lot of pressure on the mental and emotional person. And this is what we do. We defend it with this arrogance, I know stuff.
Absolutely.
Right? Now, you have said this to me, Philia. I'm proud of you, Jay. Right? I was on a Facebook, listening to a Facebook post with a person who is successful, and he doesn't like anyone saying they're proud of them unless they actually have done this amazing amount of work. There's certain people that are only allowed to be proud of him. And I responded with, this is stupid. Right? This is a person who's just saying they're proud of you. And he took it like, oh, well, I've put some weight into your life. I don't think about things this way. And I responded to him, because this is the arrogance that a lot of leaders, when they get successful, are showing. Only the type of people who are worth his time are worth feedback, are worth giving him information. And so he's not willing to listen to a person on the street anymore, because they're not part of his tribe that are allowed to give him input and feedback anymore because of his arrogance. And this is what leadership does. I remember one moment I was having some issues with I have an ex-wife and my daughter. I was having troubles with some things, and I was just had someone fixing my window. And I told him what was going on in my life. He gave me some feedback about what I should do as a parent. He gave me better feedback than any of the therapists I was seeing, any of the people, any of my friends. He gave me better feedback than anybody. And if I was thinking he was just the window guy, I would have missed out on exactly how I needed to display myself as a split family parent. He gave me gold. See, this is a problem with people who are in leadership. If they're not able to have the humility, they've got low ears, their ears are down unless someone in front of them is worth their time.
So what are other ways to, make sure that when you go into that leadership role to keep that humility with you? Like, one thing that you said just then was openness to everyone regardless, and then always continually learning. Well,
I think we need to be able to hear what people have to say. We have to take in information, and look, a lot of leaders, this is what they do. This is the mistake that they do. So I'm going to go to what they do wrong first. Is they try and pinpoint a weakness in the person. Right? This is what's wrong. So then they don't actually listen to something really important that they may need to hear. So the most important thing that you do is actually be open to hearing the information that's being shared. Because if you're not, then you're going to be looking to pinpoint a weakness to justify your expertise. What this does, and there's a psychological term for this, it's called cognitive dissonance. It means that your bubble is your bubble. So people go into the expertise bubble. And I don't ever want to consider myself an expert for that reason, because I know I will just be an expert in the bubble that I'm in. And I know that if someone provides a different opinion, then it's going to burst my bubble. Or I'm going to hold that bubble so in place that I will put the volume of what is in my head on 10 and put the volume on what everyone else's head on 0. And if you think about what's happening in the world right now, everyone has an opinion, right?
Yeah.
And if your opinion doesn't match someone else's opinion, let's say it's the opposite, then you don't listen. That is the stupidest human condition that exists. Because humility will always look on the other side of the coin to find out why the other side of the coin thinks the way it does.
Yeah.
So if we think about vaccinations, for example, there's pro-vaccinations, there's pro-choice, and there's anti-vaccinations. Now, pro-choice are put in the anti-vaccination group, right? They're by the pro-vaxxers. But on both sides of the coin, what's their intention?
Safety.
That's it, right? So, anti-vaxxers are looking at safety, pro-vaxxers are looking at safety.
So really, when you boil it down, everyone's working for the same goal, just in different ways.
Different angles and different approaches. And they're fighting tooth and nail for their beliefs and their constructs, that they are so vehemently opposed to anything other than their point of view. So this is like, two sides of government. Same, the left side and the right side of government, they don't talk to each other.
And it's so interesting as well, like once we have that view, we're always just looking for proof of that, which is also part of the cognitive dissonance. So if I believe, the earth is flat, then I'm just going to look for proof that the earth is flat and not that it's actually round. So
that's right.
Yeah,
exactly. And so this is what we do, and we look for people who are going to validate that. So humility is always looking for reasons why people are doing things the way that they're doing it, and they're wanting to understand the human nature of life, and they're not righteous in their nature. Right, so righteousness is actually one of the most difficult things that we have as a human condition, because righteousness means everyone else is wrong. Right, so there's another form of righteousness that I'm not going to delve into here that is good. We're not talking about that. We're talking about humility. So righteousness is healthy when it's placed right, and not in the way that humility is meant to be placed. So if we look at the humble person as an example, I would look at a person like the Dalai Lama, a person like I remember reading his book, and he was talking about having meetings with Christians and Catholics, and even he wrote in his book, even though he didn't believe in himself what for him the way of living for Catholics and Christians, he fully appreciated and understood the reason and purpose for what they were doing. See, that's humility. Rather than going, if you don't believe in Christianity, you will go to hell. That is a righteous, difficult position, and you imagine what this is for other people. Why do you think people hate the church? For that righteous reason. You will never go, you will never be a good person. You go to hell if you don't believe in God. Right? And so that's a problem. There's no humility in that. And so what people do, if people put all of these brash statements and rules and regulations, part of us, no one wants to feel oppressed. Humility doesn't feel oppressed. Right? It's open to opinions, and it wants to express itself, and it wants to find out why, and it's unlimited in its growth, in its way it thinks as a construct. So the most humble people are massive absorbers.
just like a sponge taking in everything, not just like, oh, not this, but only this.
And the biggest problem for it, if you're a sponge without your own opinions, there's a problem.
Then you're just an adapter.
You're just adapting to every situation that occurs. So humility, when it's done really well through leadership, it actually grabs all the information, absorbs what it needs, and then it takes its own opinion and understands it. And so some of that information might break the opinion of the person and say, oh, I really feel this, I'm going to add that string to this bow, this doesn't really resonate with my life. So then you can make really clear decisions as a humble-based leader.
So you got to be okay with being wrong.
Yeah.
And being like, I was wrong, I'm gonna, my beliefs have changed.
Yeah, and look, as a parent, I've apologised to my kids many times because I didn't do it right. That's a humble-based leader as a parent. See, it doesn't just leadership, when you're looking at a leadership model, listeners, it's not just placed in where you do when you're at work. How do you have humility in your relationships of friends? How do you have your humility in your relationship with your partnership? How do you have humility in relationship to money, which is the hardest one to have humility around? Because people, I was chatting to someone and about this, and people who have a lot of money have more choice, right? So they can decide and define more evenly what they want and how they want their lives to be. And so if you don't have humility and you have a lot of money, you will dominate people as opposed to support people in life, right? So it's knowing how to have it in all those places and getting it right. Leadership is not just about leaders in governments or leaders in, like for me, in the academy. It's about how you individualise your leadership in daily life. And I've said this a lot of times, listeners, as you might not have seen on my podcast or heard them all. It's what you do as a leader when no one's looking that provides the most humility. Right? If you're embarrassed with what you're doing behind closed doors, then how are you going to lead in front of the doors? You're going to be faking it.
And that's the thing with you as well. You're the same at home as here and everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, people who see me in my private life actually don't see any difference. I'm just being me.
And it must be much easier as well than putting on a, persona or anything like that.
Yeah, and look, I, because I've helped a lot of leaders over the years, the persona that people put on, they don't put it on with me. So they get to tell me everything that's going on. I've got that I'll tell you everything because you're safe. And I think that's what we've got to be able to do as leaders. We've got to be more transparent, and that's what humility does. It doesn't have to be right. It does what's right, though.
It doesn't have to be right, it does what's right. That's a good summary.
And it communicates what's right. And it's willing to look at itself, and maybe its communication was flawed. So it needs to learn something.
And also being okay with that.
Yeah. So one thing I got to see, I was at the Australian Business Awards. My mum was a finalist in the Australian Business Awards. It was really, really interesting to listen to all the people. There was so much humility in the room, to a point where there was a problem. Because they all said, it's so damn hard being in small business. Everyone agrees, right? And everyone was like, yeah. But you see how they were all enabling each other with their humility and keeping themselves stuck in this. It's all very, very difficult to be a small business owner. I was like, does it have to be that hard? I was questioning this. Belief that everyone was playing out when they were talking on stage was very much the same conversation. So how do we do that? That's crushing based belief in self, that it has to be difficult and hard, and COVID was difficult and all of this sort of stuff. And I didn't find that when I through our academy, as far as the business was concerned. I was having my own hard time with myself, but the business wasn't hard. So it's just knowing how we can collectively meet together and actually create an overly humble problem.
Yeah, and I think in that regard, what you just said with COVID as well, if you have healthy humility, you are more able to adapt as well.
Yeah, you're able to adapt. You don't have to be right. You don't go, oh, well, the government did this, so now I can't do X. You've got that ability to go, okay, well, I've got to lead. I've got to make sure I do this the way I need to, and change. And it's hard a lot of the time for people to be able to adapt and change the way that they approach. So I think humility is something that we've all got to keep a tab on. And how do you know when we're not being humble?
Good question. Probably from other people more so.
Yeah.
Then you're rather just yourself. It's harder to tell. You kind of have your blinkers on.
yeah. It's feedback. You know, and it's been interesting. My journey. I've had 95% of people have said, Jason, you're the most humble person I've ever met. You're not really, and so I do it in a difficult way for myself. I'm not really good at getting feedback, and I'm working on that a lot now at the moment to make sure that I take in feedback and not reject everyone who's giving me lovely feedback. And then I'll have 5% or 1% of say, oh, you're really arrogant, Jason, and I'm like, oh, okay, so why is that being said? And then all of those people, all of those cases that have said that, I've seen that they're not taking their life on properly. So they didn't like my feedback that I was giving them to change their life. So they call me arrogant. And I've had that many times. People have not liked feedback. And you think about that as a leader, if you don't like feedback, you're what? Arrogant. So even when a client's not happy with the feedback, they get arrogant and pissed off, and that's a clear sign that you're actually not in good shape with humility. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that would make sense.
So we've got to think, well, if we can't handle feedback, and maybe it's a truth that's hit a core of our heart, and we're not capable to receive that, our humility is actually not in a good way. Right. And I know I've experienced that, where I've not been able to, like, I've dug my heels in, got really frustrated or pissed off, and I'm like, you've just dropped your humility to listen. So as an example, when what a humble-based person does, if they see something that's out of balance in another person, first thing a humble-based leader will do is they'll look, where am I doing it? They'll try and find where they're doing it in their life. It might be in a different area. It might be a completely different situation. If you can see it so clearly, it must be happening somewhere in your world. Right?
So, for example, if I went and somebody was really angry in a relationship, for example, and I noticed that, I'm like, man, they're really angry in their relationship. So then that would be thinking about, where am I really angry? It might be a different area. Maybe I'm really angry at work or something like that. Yeah.
So we've got to know where it places itself, and a true humble person will be constantly wanting to grow themselves into a better leader all the time. They're constantly in that place of looking at what they can do to improve, and while at the same time they will be not putting so many tickets on what they do. I'm really good at this with people. I think I do really well, and then the other part can be a little bit crushing, is when someone says to me, and I have this every single week, if I didn't meet you, my life wouldn't be the same. You sent me that message a couple of weeks ago, right? Cody, your partner, sent me a message exactly the same thing. Pretty much every Academy member has said that about me. And what a humble-based leader will do is that if you didn't take the information on, you wouldn't be where you are. So a humble-based leader will always offer the information to share to help people change their lives. They will not be taking on saying, well, yes, I didn't live your life. I didn't achieve the things that you achieved. You took the advice on that changed your life. The impact was based on your choices, right? I'll tell you why, listeners, is that for people who take on board this feedback and says, yes, I did all of that for you and I was that person, and I agree, a lot of people wouldn't be in the same place. I get that, I take that on. At the same time, I'd be taking on all the feedback who did of people who did nothing with my help. Right? And that's all my fault. Blame, projection, and all that sort of stuff. So, and this is what a lot of leaders do, right? Oh yes, I'm the one who saved your life. I'm the one who did this. I'm the one who did that. Someone has a go at them and go, oh yeah, they weren't responsible people. So they put those in the back burner, take all the accolades on, and they end up with their head firmly up their butt. Right? And so you have to be mindful of knowing how to deal with feedback really, really well. So I understand and I agree. If I didn't make an impact in their life or show them a different approach, they wouldn't be where they are. At the same time, I understand that if they didn't take life on through that feedback, they wouldn't have changed either. Right? And that's where a humble-based leader will not be going, yes, I am the hero of your journey. I was actually the Yoda of your journey and helped you become your own hero of your life.
Yeah, that's really good as well. It's not just you. It's like, well, you could tell me do this and this and this, that would change my life, but the question is, am I actually going to do that?
That's right. So this is where if you think about Yoda, and for example, did he pump his chest up and ever say he was awesome?
No.
A wise-based leader doesn't do that. They just they pump up the awesomeness of the people around them to make them look better, and they know that they have a role to play, and they're not so connected so deeply to their ego. And so this means that you don't get so affected by the ups and downs of life either.
Absolutely.
Right? And we've got to learn to be able to do this. Like, imagine this, Philia. You're in this business world, and you're like, I want to create this 7-figure business, but you were never able. You only ever got to 800,000 a year. What would you be?
In that, like, looking objectively from my perspective now, I'm like, okay, I would be still very happy because that's a great achievement. But then probably if you're in the situation, you're just like, oh, I never made my goal.
Yeah, never hit my goal, so I'm a failure. But if we look at that, that's over 10 times the average income of Australians. So that's a pretty damn good success. 800k a year, even 100k a year is almost double the average income of Australians. So if we think about this when we're thinking about humility, is to be able to reflect on where we are rather than constantly thinking about where we need to be. It's not about not having goals. It's just knowing that the goals are not going to actually create a detriment to your human psyche.
So being fulfilled from the inside rather than making it reliant on the outside.
And that's what a humble person does. Is they've got more internal space. They haven't. A lot of people who don't have that humility in leadership, their buckets are so thin that they're reactive to the outside world so often, whereas a humble-based leader is very, very responsive to the world around them. And it takes effort. It's not easy to have that, especially when you see what needs to be done and your humility is there, and you can see the world in a place where it's not sitting in the right place, and you could be a person who doesn't have enough push to make it happen. Right? So a lot of the people who are really, really amazing leaders, they're not me people. Okay? They're we people.
We instead of me.
Yeah, very different, and it's just one little word switched, upside down or the right way up. Does that make sense?
True,
just a W or an M. So if we look at this, for all of you who are listening right now, I'd love you to actually ask yourself, where is your humility not there? Where you're actually running a little bit of righteousness. What I suggest you do is have a look at the opposite opinion. Open your ears out and see what they're thinking and why. Do they have the same purpose? Right? And reasoning. I used to argue with a partner of mine at the time about stuff that we were doing. I'd say, we've got the exact same reason. And she'd say, no. I'd be like, this is I'm just coming from this angle, you're coming from this angle, but we're actually hitting the same point. She was so righteous. I was like, and I had to pull her back and say, you've got this and I've got this, and this is what we want, right? Yeah. This is how I language, this is how you language. No, your language is wrong. I'm just like, okay. Her ears were so closed. And I was trying to just point out we had the same focus, which was helping people. Right? Just different language to do it. And a different way of approach. And the actual angle was exactly the same where we were going with children. It was about children at the time. So the people who can't listen, they're fundamentally flawed in the language. They get stuck on their language.
So we got to figure out where we're not listening.
Yeah. And it's challenging, listeners. Like, I know when you can see someone who's trying to give you feedback and they are so dysfunctional in their life and you can see it, take the feedback. Because there'll be something you need to learn and find out where it is so you can change it. I think it's really, really important.
Absolutely. Is there any other ways that you can check? So you're being humble or not? I
think the most important thing, as you said earlier, is other people giving you feedback. Right? Making sure that you are checking in with other people. One thing I know, listeners, is that you can't gauge how you are in the world while you're in your own internal world. Other people will see other things in you that you can't see. And you've seen this with people. You look at people and they go, how can they not see what they're doing?
Yeah.
Right? But
when you're in your own
bubble, you can't see it. So you've got to be able to listen to other people's information and inputs. And if you're hearing a lot of the same thing and you're negating it, there could be a problem. Right? So take feedback on, listen to people. Make sure that you don't listen to the people who are potentially enabling you to stay stuck. So I'll give you a really cool example of this before we finish up today. There was a lady who was talking about addiction. She put a big post up and she said, no one understands unless you've had an addiction to drugs and alcohol. And people who have an addiction to drugs and alcohol, you stay that way for the rest of your life. You are battling every morning that you're wondering if you're going to have that drink. You know, you have to think, you're always on it every second of the day to make sure that you don't take those drugs and alcohol. No one understands. And if you haven't been part of that, your opinion doesn't matter. So what did I do?
You probably wrote something very different underneath that post.
I did. I wrote something very different and I said, well, from all the people that I've worked with who have addiction problems, not one of them have said, not one of them has stayed in AA or any of these drug addictive places because they're not that person anymore. And they saw that they were being enabled by the organisation to say, I'm an alcoholic and I'll stay one for the rest of my life. None of them are anymore. We have addicted-based people who aren't that way anymore in the academy at all. So how did they break the system? They break the system because they weren't enabled by the people around them. So a person who's got the humility will be able to go, we listen to the feedback, to the right feedback that's going to challenge our psyche to be different and grow. Right? And it's very, very challenging when you meet people and all these people are posting, yes. Right now it's 2022. Apparently all entrepreneurs have ADHD. Everyone's calling themselves out as ADHD. I understand why. You know, they all have very similar traits. They have no stop button. They're not really regulated in their emotions because they've been taught to be emotionally regulated, very mental and very task orientated, and they don't know how to actually just sit and relax. Right? So they've all called themselves out. Are they calling themselves out because they want to stay the same?
Yep.
100% they are.
If you put a label on it, you can stay the same.
That's right. And I look and I just go, well, that's tough. And I put a post up to any ADHD people and they don't really respond to me. Right? It's the reason why it's again another construct. And do you have the humility or the want to actually break the construct? Because I believe everything, if you want it, can be broken. And it's really up to you.
Absolutely. This is a really good advice.
Yeah, so listeners, look, if you liked this podcast, share it and let everyone know about it. It'd be really good for people to have the opportunity, review it and put some comments on it. I'd really appreciate it.
Have a good day. See you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to our podcast. We really appreciate you and we really appreciate your time, because time is so valuable. What we'd love you guys to do, if you like this podcast, if you could share it with your friends, and also our website address for the podcast is www.wellnessbreakthroughacademypodcast.com. Our website is www.wellnessbreakthroughacademy.com. We have a free Facebook group called Wellness Leadership Evolution, so search for that. I'd love it if you could add me as a friend on Facebook. I don't bite, so add me as a friend, and if you want some help and you would really like some support from us in the Academy, jump in. We have a process. You can do a break-in call to connect in with us. We do small courses. We have lots of things that we share. So we'd love the opportunity to give you a chance to change your life and turn it into a free one. You are one transformation away from change. Come and catch up.